on behalf of myself, thank you for your service as jurors. One of the most important fundamental rights that we have as American citizens is our right, our privilege to come into a courtroom and to serve on a jury, to be the judges of the facts of the case of a fellow human being in the case of Commonwealth versus Rene Ramos. Several weeks ago, all 15 of you who come from different areas of Middlesex County, you came into this courtroom. You sat at a table over here. You were let in one at a time. You had a chance to be questioned by the judge. You had a chance to hear what he had to say. You had a chance to answer those questions. Could you be a fair juror? Do you believe in all of the concepts of law that were laid out to you by Judge Turnoff? Judge Turnoff told you that your service as jurors will be one of the most compelling and enlightening and enriching things that you have in the course of your life. Over the last 2 weeks, you've had a chance to listen to all of the evidence in the case. You are indeed the triers of fact, the judges of the fact, the people who decide what's true and what's not true. So on behalf of myself, Mr. Ramos, and Ms. Early, thank you for your service as jurors. Over the last 2 weeks, I know that you've paid attention to all of the witnesses. You've listened to the judge's instructions. Now, Judge Turnoff has told you, and he'll tell you again, that my client's presumed to be innocent, that the burden of proof in this case rests with the Commonwealth, and that the standard of proof is the highest one in the American legal system, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, all of you who come into a courtroom, you listen to the evidence that's given to you by Judge Turnoff. You apply it to the laws that he gives it to you, and you take the facts as you find them up on the witness stand. But there's something that we all have as human beings. There's something that we bring into this courtroom that's sometimes called common sense, but it's better called commonality of our experience as human beings. It's our ability to use logic, our ability to discern, our ability to use logical reasoning to take steps in evaluating evidence. It's something that you have done every day of your adult life and the decisions that you make. But in this case, the standard of proof is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the Commonwealth has clearly not met in this case. Because you are to decide this case, ladies and gentlemen, and I beseech you to decide this case on logic. I beseech you to decide this case on reason, to use your intelligence, to use your ability to discern. Not to use sympathy, not to use any kind of empathy for individuals that were unfortunately killed in the day in question. You're going to have these photographs with you when you go back. They've been marked into evidence, Exhibits 31 and 32. There were 2 people who were killed on January 31st, 2002. Although it is a tragic thing, I ask you not to decide this case on sympathy, not to decide this case based upon any type of an emotional response, but to use your reason and logic and go through the evidence that you've heard over the last 2 weeks, and the reasonable inferences that you can draw from it. To use that, when you bring into this courtroom your ability to use your logic, to use your intelligence to go back through these facts and to decide the facts in these cases based upon proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, as you take a look at the evidence here, you know that on January 31st, 2002, that the Lowell Police Department was called at about 11:30 over to the Marathon. First of all, let's go through the crime scene. When you start going through the crime scene in your duty as a juror to search for reasonable doubt, think about the testimony of Ms. Gagny Annis, the individual who was an EMT, who came into this courtroom, and she testified that when she got there at some point between 11:30 and midnight, how did she describe that crime scene? Do you remember that word? Chaos. Chaos. Because that's what it was. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there was a distinct crime scene between 11:30, when the officers are called there from Lowell, and several hours later, when those 2 individuals, Mr. Martin and Trooper Chan, arrive on the scene. Because Martin and Chan don't get there for 2 hours. Martin and Chan are not part of that chaos. That chaos that goes on for 2 hours, between 11:30 and 1:30 or thereafter. Think about those first 3 officers who testified, Kinney, Sheehan, Hodgson. Think help of any individuals that may be hurt, which is also reasonable. When they come up to that car, they don't know what they're going to see when they come up to that Suburban. However, after they make those determinations, after they make a determination that they themselves are not in jeopardy, after they make a determination, we have to help these two people that are in the car. It's at that point in time. It's at that point in time to focus on the chaos, to focus on the crime scene, to focus on proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because what you have is you have Officer Kinney, who doesn't even begin to keep the crime log of who comes there, or the scene log, who comes there until after midnight, a half an hour after they have called there. So for this first half an hour, there are people who were traipsing all over the place. There might have been some crime scene tape that was put out. So you're going to have a chance to take a look at all of the photographs in this case. And as you go back through all of the photographs in this case, I ask you to take a look at all of those footprints that were there. Think about the lack of preservation of the evidence at the time. There were two important factors. One are the footprints. Two are those tire impressions. There was absolutely nothing that was done for those 2 hours to preserve those footprints that are near the car. Nothing whatsoever. And the only thing that is done in any effort to preserve the tire treads is some sort of covering is put on them, whether it's a tarp, a cardboard, or whatever you want to believe based upon what's in the photographs. But you also heard from Mr. Martin, I believe, who said that had a tendency to melt the snow. It had a tendency to disturb the crime scene as opposed to preserve the crime scene. So when you have a chance to take a look at those two vital factors, the footprints and the tire treads, when you think about the lack of preservation that was done there, go back and hold that critically to the government, which bears the burden of proof. Were these investigations done correctly? Was the crime scene preserved correctly? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Think about what Sheehan and Kinney and Hodgson had to say about the initial investigation. Sheehan was looking around kind of in the dark, looking for evidence in a willy-nilly fashion. One of the officers said that he went and he sat in a car for a couple of hours as the investigation unfolded. Were there reasonable steps that were taken by the police at that scene to go into that hotel to determine who was in there, to determine whose cars were parked within 10 or 15 feet from the Suburban? Do you know that? Whose car was parked next to the Suburban? Whose car was parked on the other side of the Suburban? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. You don't even know whose cars were parked in the vicinity of where the Suburban was on the night in question. They took down the license plate numbers. They sure did that. They went to some of the hotel rooms, but in the hotel rooms, we don't even know the people that were interviewed. They only interviewed some of the people that were in the hotel. Well, the government says, well, it was only those windows that came out onto that Bushman's parking lot. How about this? There were a lot of other cars that were parked in that lot that have never been connected to any individual. Whether they were in that hotel, not in that hotel, or not in that hotel. Nothing was ever done to connect those people, cars, hotel guests, people who actually weren't in the hotel. Use your common sense. Use your ability to reason here. Does that sound like a reasonable police investigation? Of course not. Of course not. Nothing done. Are you convinced that the search of the area was a thorough search? Are you convinced that the search of those surrounding streets, businesses, whatever else may be of a thorough nature, based upon what you've heard, who did what? As Officer Sheehan so eloquently said up on the witness stand when asked for a cross-examination, well, who was in charge? Where's the effect of 7 years later? I'm still not sure. The crime scene was a rudderless ship for 2 hours. There were people who were going this way, people who were going that way, in a confusing mishmash of misinvestigation. What happens, though, is who come to the scene. Jan and Martin, and we'll get to them later. But for those 2 hours, I want you to think about what could have been done, what should have been done, what sounds reasonable, what wasn't done. No idea of who they spoke to in the hotel. No link between the cars and the guests. Nothing done to preserve the footprints. Little done to preserve the tire tracks, and what was done was mismanaged. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, of course. Now, as the investigation began to unfold over the course of the next several days, you had a chance to listen to other officers who became involved. Think about the various things that were done over the course of the next several days and over the course of the next several years in this investigation. Take a look at it in determining whether the government has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Take a look at it in determining whether the police used reasonable steps. There was some evidence that Leone was presented with a photo array. Do you have a photo array? Has that ever been presented to you? No. 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 How about this slip of paper that Nigro supposedly writes the name Rene on as someone that PJ had just met? Have you been presented with that? Where's that piece of paper? Certainly not in evidence. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, a reasonable police investigation? Of course not. Of course not. Think about any follow-up that doesn't seem to have been done with the hotel. The only person that you heard testify that went back to take a look at the grounds of the hotel the next day was Walsh. And he wasn't called out on the night in question, which is another curious factor, that the ballistician isn't called to the crime scene. He goes there the next day, to his credit, but he wasn't called on the night in question. As you go back through this investigation, the crime scene was chaos. The investigation, rudderless, disorganized, without a leader. Who was in charge of the investigation? Do you know? Did any of you know? Was it this Trooper Hunt? This Sergeant Duggan? Whoever they may be? Who was it? Who leaded it? Who guided it? Who was in charge of it? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, bias, and proof of the American legal system, the government bearing the burden of proof in this case, a flawed police investigation, a chaotic crime scene. Sergeant Sheehan, 7 years later, doesn't know who is in charge. God wins. Now, there are certain things that the government says happened on February 1st of 2012. A witness gets up on the stand, state police trooper, who's now outside, and says that we went over to Rene Ramos' house over on Moody Street that night. And we came in and we talked. Now, one thing that's clear is that Rene Ramos, just like he had said to Nigro, denied any involvement in the death of P.J. Donovan, denied involvement in the death of Michael Donovan. Go back through and pick your way through those statements. And go back again to things that are available to the police. Reasonable, thorough investigation would dictate, would it not? Using your common sense, using your experience as human beings. What would it take what somebody says? That at the very least, you would take some notes on what is being said. When you're talking to someone, in a conversation that supposedly happened over 7 years ago.
January 25th, 2002. J.T. Nigro testified. He introduced Paul Donovan to the defendant, Rene Ramos. That he saw them exchange phone numbers. that he heard them discuss the selling of drugs, that he knew Rene was always willing to expand his business. Less than 6 days later, ladies and gentlemen, Lowell police find Paul Donovan, top of his head, gone. Dead in the car. Thursday night, January 31st. Police get the call at 28. We find his brother Michael, who looked like that prior to 11/28, January 31st. In his bedroom slippers, behind the wheel of his father's car. The hole above his right eye coming out over his left ear. Groaning, brain activity. He lingers for 4 more hours before he too dies. John Albano, Michael Leone, and Justin McCarty had nothing to do with this. They testified about what they know. You do not find the Vienna Boy Squire in the business of selling marijuana. You do not find choir boys. You find people involved in drugs. They still have friends. They still have friendships. They still try and cover for each other. Some of them a little longer than others. Less than 12 hours after Paul Donovan and Michael Donovan were found, Michael Leone is in the police station giving a statement. No, he did not say that Albano supplied Paul Donovan. He did say that Paul Donovan met up with Rene Ramos at Tony's Pizza on the 26th, that Saturday, 5 days before the murders. He testified that they were eating food sitting across from each other, closer than I am to you, in a restaurant, daytime, introduced to him by Paul Donovan. This is my friend Michael. This is Rene. He tells him the discussion is about drugs. How much can PJ, Paul Donovan, produce for Rene? What weight? How quickly? What quality? What price? Can you front it? No, not the first time. He's shown a photo array. He picks Rene's photo out. He picks him out in court, points right at him. No hesitation. A perjured. He did, at the grand jury, he would not say that Albano supplied PJ. But less than 12 hours after the murders, he gave all the same information he gave on the stand last week. Was he impeached with any inconsistent statements? Maybe a little bit about facial hair. Anything else? I suggest not. His statement has been consistent since February 1st, 2002. J.T. Nigro, he testified he wrote the name down on a piece of paper. You don't see a piece of paper, it'll make a difference. Sloppy police work. You misplace a small piece of paper after 7 years. Put it in perspective, ladies and gentlemen. There are things considered important and unimportant in investigation. Hindsight is always 20/20. But I would suggest J.T. Nigro gave Rene's phone number that he calls him at, 978-479-0510. The phone that Rene Ramos told the police that night he didn't have. What happened in the week prior to the murders? In between that meeting with Rene at JT Nigro's house, the meeting with JT observes Rene and Paul Donovan exchange phone numbers. Observes them talking. Observes the goodbye comment, talk to you later. Well, the next day, PJ and Michael are dropping JT's car back at his house. On the way back to Bill Ricker, PJ gets a call. Michael doesn't know who it belongs to. But they divert from going home to Bill Ricker to going to Tony's Pizza. And look at the phone records, ladies and gentlemen. There's a call from 0510 to PJ's phone of 978-479-7779 on Saturday afternoon, January 26th. That's the start. They go to Tony's. They weren't discussing the quality of marijuana. They were discussing the sale of marijuana. They were discussing how much could PJ supply to Rene. How quickly he could get. The method of payments. Could you front? No, not the first time. They agreed to talk again in the future. And when you look at the phone records, you'll see they did. Several times leading up to the 31st of January. Phone records, they don't tell you who's on the phone. But Shane Walsh does. The day after the murders, February 1st, you look at the records. On the phone that Rene Ramos says he didn't have, 0510, he calls JT's home at 12:23. Shane Walsh talks to him, recognizes his voice. Can't tell who used the phone, but Rene Ramos' voice was on the other end of it. He doesn't use that phone. No one can prove it. JT and I will talk to him on the phone. Others spoke to him on the phone. The phone record, the car records for the Honda Civic have his phone number on it, 0510, going back to November of 2001. The phone he told the police he didn't have. And he doesn't have. John Albano, he was protecting himself. He was supplying 100 pounds of marijuana a week. Major drug dealer. Yes, he was going to protect himself. Frustrating? Investigation took 5 years, 4 years to culminate in indictments. Looking for something? I believe he testified he went back to jail after he testified to the grand jury and was found guilty. When he testified in 2009, any cases pending on him? I suggest not. Did he tell anyone about those meetings with PJ? Well, Sean Lee. And what did he know about the crime, about what happened? He never met Rene Ramos, but yet in a statement to the police that morning, he told them he heard that PJ had just met this guy, Rene Ramos. Referred to him as a black kid from Lowell. And he talked about how PJ came to visit him Tuesday or Wednesday in between the first initial meeting and the fateful day of the 31st. He talked about how Rene was going to deal with, PJ was going to deal with Rene, start out with 5 pounds, go up to 10 pounds a week soon. No ands, ifs, or buts. And the phone records from the calls to Albano are on those records also. And on January 31st, Albano gets a call from PJ. Phone records confirmed. I need 5 pounds. I come over again and sell it to Rene. He shows up out in the driveway. And contrary to statements made in closing by the defense, Keith Dodge did not dispute what happened. Albano's testimony was that Keith Dodge may have come up to the driveway. He doesn't remember. Definitely was not there during the transfer of the drugs, but he may have come up. Keith Dodge said he did. He was out in the car, trunk of his car, takes out 5 pounds of marijuana, 2 half-pound bags, large to 1 1-pound bag. Puts them in market basket shopping bags. Has a conversation with PJ. He's meeting up with Rene someplace by exit 3 off the Lowell Connect Industrial Avenue. Now that's sometime between 10:30 or 11. We next have Albano expecting PJ to return because he fronted PJ 5 pounds of 3,000 pounds, $15,000. Albano lost. No calls by 11:30. No PJ by 11:30. He calls repeatedly. Dodge calls him repeatedly. And if you look at Paul's records, phone records, all those right to voicemail, 6245. They go home. Who drove who? Does it matter? Does it truly matter? Now we know from Kelly Walker that PJ and Michael were up at the Mobile on a Run, right down the street from Industrial Ave. 11:05, they picked up those V8 splash rings, the 2 found in the car. And then they drove. And they drove away. And they're in a white Suburban. She doesn't know which way they went, other than they went towards Industrial Ave from Wayne Farm. Or Cross Point, as it's now called. That's the last time, other than the shooter in the back seat of the car, anyone saw Michael Paul alive. That was 11:05. We know a phone call came from 1698 to 7779 at 11:14 p.m. But when you look at the records, you'll also notice that it is star at the beginning of the number sequence for 1698. That indicates whoever made the call was blocking the phone number from the intended recipient of 7779. Why? I would suggest to conceal that it was not Rene's phone being used, that Rene was on the phone using Benji's phone. And their cell tower was 6825. 2825. Got that confused myself. Both hitting the same tower. Now, counsel made much of the strength of the tower was greater than depicted on that diagram. It's true. But it's the weakness of the system is the phone calling back. If the phone can't reach the tower, it doesn't matter how strong the tower is. It has to hit the tower. And there's another diagram in there which shows, all in 3 colors, the strong points of each of the towers in question here. 2947 down Moody Street and Crosspoint. See, because up until 11:14 phone call, the 11:03 phone call with 7779, Paul Donovan, called 0510 Rene, automatically forwarded to 16980 Benji, was hitting down on Moody Street, 2947, the same street that Rene Ramos lived on. And if you look at the calls all that night, you'll see they were from 2947 Moody Street. Except for around 8 p.m. that night. There's several phone calls on Benji's phone, 1698, received and forwarded to his number, as well as numbers called without the star. They were hitting the same tower that was hit at 11:14 p.m. 8 o'clock at night. Might have suggested for scouting out the area where they were going to have to meet at 11:14. This isn't something creative, ladies and gentlemen. It's in the records. It's in those phone records. And those phone records document each one of the calls between Rene Ramos 0510 and Paul Donovan 7779. The chart says tribute. Well, when a phone is used to call someone, the person knows who's on the other end. It's no longer a tribute. It's a document. Albano was interviewed and he said nothing for 4 years. No one knew about Justin McCarty for a couple of years. He came forward to get something off his chest. He had been concerned back in 2002. He had just heard that a person with an angry voice, with an angry face, had told him, "I better be able to trust you," had killed 2 people. Was he scared? Was he afraid for everyone involved in that household? Is that why he said nothing? Who knows? What does know is that facts he stated were made to him by Rene's brother, Angel Fabi, could only have been known by the shooter. How else would one know that T.J. Donovan shot in the back of the head? How else would he have known about the marijuana taken from the car? How else would he have known about bloody clothing and a bloody car? Just keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, not knowing the immediate murder, he saw clothes he attributed to Rene in his home shortly after the murder. He saw the black Honda Civic in his driveway shortly after the murder. He smelled the strong odor of ammonia in that car shortly after the murder. And ammonia, the DNA expert stated, could corrode, degenerate any possibility of getting DNA from blood. Why did the car have a strong odor of ammonia? Why were jackets and boots believed to be worn by Rene, according to Ricard, given away within days of the murder? Ricard said, Bobby came in the room, he was upset. And Ricard said, "What is going on?" He saw the clothes, he saw the car. And Carter tells him, his brother and Benjamin were making a deal. He said they were burned before. And they got in the back seat of the SUV. And that one of them pulled a gun and he shot him in the back of the head. Now picture, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn my back to you and I apologize. PJ is sitting in the right front seat. He turns to his left to talk. Right off the top of his head. That's where the woman was. How does one find that position? One looks at where the round hit the windshield right in front of him. The round went in and out in a space of, I believe, 1 5/8 inches. It drove bone and bullet fragments down into the brain. Didn't get shot in the arm. Didn't get shot in the leg. Didn't get shot in the back. Shot on top of the head. And you can picture Michael sitting in the driver's seat, looking around. Here's a shot, turns around, boom. Right above the right eye. And out over to right here. And out to the window. Why did he shoot Michael? So there'd be no witness. Kid pulls a gun on him, shoots him in the head. Then he shoots the only witness of self-defense. What self-defense? There was no weapon found. Was Rene justifying to his brother why he cowardly shot 2 kids? Was it a drug plan from the beginning? I would suggest it was. Obama gave him 5 pounds of marijuana in 2 big plastic bags that were gone from the car. How would McCarty know that? They told him there was more marijuana than they expected. Where was the gun? No gun was found. A small little pocket knife. You saw the picture. It was underneath Paul Donovan's left thigh. Closed position. And that's the only identifiable print found in the car. They didn't even find Michael or Paul's fingerprints in the car. Does that mean they weren't in there? Does that mean their bodies weren't there when the police showed up? No, ladies and gentlemen. It means fingerprints sometimes don't exist. Poor investigation. Sloppy investigation. Sloppy crime scene. The first officers showed up who were intent on trying to secure the vehicle and save their lives, Paul and Michael. Paul was already deceased. They were trying to save Michael. What is the priority? Watching where you step in snow or trying to save a life? Yes, sometimes you sacrifice chaos. But the EMT said it was chaotic on arrival, and then she started concentrating on Michael. John Shannon is blasted for doing a loopy search or some word that was used. John Shannon testified he followed the ambulance to the hospital and stayed there with the ambulance. Jim Hodgkins went door to door on every window facing that parking lot and talked to everyone. An investigation doesn't mean you talk to 200 people. An investigation means you talk to people that are necessary. And you interview and take statements from those witnesses that are necessary. And Officer Kenny, 3 months after the academy, is told, right down who goes there. And he did. And Bob Martin, shoddy investigation. So shoddy, he found a bullet round 78 feet away from the car in snow because of his method of searching. 78 feet in snow. He logically figured out the path of the round, and he was right. And Sergeant Walsh, or Trooper Walsh, the round, the fragments come from Paul's head, and that round that was found in the snow, similar rifling, that's all he can say. The shell casing, a 9mm Luger. Without a gun, you cannot do a comparison, ladies and gentlemen. Without boots, you can't compare footprints. Without tires, you can't compare tire tracks. When they found Rene's car, notwithstanding his story that he had built a sale on February 13th, transferring the car to him from Benjamin, ignoring the fact that he was the listed driver of the car when he went for repairs in November, December, and January, with his phone number of 0510. It had a flat tire and a bubble on the right front tire. And the rims were different, according to Joseph Kabila. They had 8 lug nut rims with held on by 4 lug nuts. Standard for a Honda? I would suggest it was not. Things were replaced. Phone numbers, don't have the phone. The investigation, ladies and gentlemen, Trooper Bobby Chan testified how they feel in that car under a tent back at the station. They found 8 prints, a singular print on the door frame. People wear gloves, maybe? There's snow down there. Not all big midgets, some of them gloves. All of Michael's fingerprints were in the car. Now the family members were in the car. Does that mean anything? No. I suggest it be nice if they were. But they weren't. No idea how long that print had been there. Could have been there months. Jan can't age when that print was left. There were flashes on those shoestrings. Unable to raise any further print. Now we have a witness testifying that Michael and Paul brought them 15 minutes earlier. He turns speaking to us. If in fact one could be found. Shots came from the back seat. Justin McCarty did not know that. He went by what he was told. And the physical evidence support that the rounds came from the back seats. The shot through the driver's window, the shot into the front windshield. Ladies and gentlemen, the beginning of this case, we talked about puzzle. Well, there is a picture in front of you. Picture brought out by 72-something individuals, 25 witnesses. Is it a great picture? No. It's a picture of 2 boys dead. 18-year-old Michael and 20-year-old Paul. I'll use the word execute. They didn't have a chance. It's cold-blooded. Premeditated. There was no purpose in that being other than to rip off that marijuana. There was no money found in the car either. The white bags were gone. In the space of time, ladies and gentlemen, we think the 911 call came in at 11:28. Take 2 minutes off of that for people at the hotel to be back in the call. And 11:14 being the last call. Window of 10 to 12 minutes for 2 men to drive up to that car, Rene Ramos and Benjamin, get in the back seat of the SUV, and execute both of them. Take off bags of driveway, hop right on the connect, and back to Moody Street. Chester McCarty is credible with what he said. The evidence supports what he said. There is corroboration to what he said. You look at the location of the rounds. You look at the lack of drugs found. You look at seeing clothing worn by the kids up in New Hampshire. You hear conversations with Rene telling him, I better be able to trust you 3 times. What does that mean? I better be able to trust you. He knew him. He had met him before down in Lowell. I better be able to trust you. This is after yelling at his brother in Spanish in an angry tone with an angry face. That was not something Rene Fabi was supposed to tell anyone. Not outside the family. But he did. Fabi knew McCarty better than Rene did. And then the ammonia in the car. He had told him there was blood in the car. The phone records, we heard about bouncing and we heard about interference. And quite simply, Mr. Sutherland told you, that happens, the call just doesn't register. It does not register. If you hit the tower 2947 down Moody Street, it does not bounce up to Crosspoint and register on Crosspoint. It registers on Moody Street. And when hitting Crosspoint, that means the phone is hitting Crosspoint. And it goes to the strongest signal. Because again, the phone is the weakest link. It'd be too technical to get into all the phone records. It was somewhat dry when it came in testimony. I will acknowledge that. But it's necessary. And when you look at those records, you'll see the nature of the calls between the parties. You'll also see on the records Rene Ramos' phone calls between, I believe, 6-something and 23-something were automatically forwarded to Benji Lopez's phone. And then afterwards, his phone came back on. Was he trying to set up Benji? Direct all evidence away from him? Don't know. Don't have an answer for that. But mysteriously, he got his phone back within a half hour of hers, making calls on him. And you'll see those records too. Ladies and gentlemen, the picture is there. The evidence supports deliberate premeditation. No other explanation exists. There was no struggle within the bodies. They weren't damaged in any other way. Gunshot on top of the head. Dead. And the look Michael must have had when he turned around and saw a gun pointing down. 1 round fired. Photos are ugly, ladies and gentlemen, and I apologize for them. There are times they show the purpose, and the purpose is the position of the bodies when they were shot, and that the shots came from the back seat of the car. And it supports what Justin Tucker said. Michael, wearing slippers, driving the car, was the witness. Rene got hit. And again, ladies and gentlemen, the choir wasn't in town. Michael Leone, protecting a friend, wouldn't reveal any slow drug sale. Nothing else he testified to was different from what he told the police less than 12 hours after the murder. Obama was protecting his self-interest. Not in 2009. Not in 2006. He testified. There was no agreement. He went back to jail. And the party? What was he impeached with prior inconsistent statements? Was he impeached? I would suggest not. We put a spin on everything. Everything is subject to interpretation. Phone records are not. Phone records show who called, who talked. The bodies tell you how they died. Michael lingered 4 hours. He was groaning when they arrived. He had a gag reflex, the EMT said, which is indicative of brain function. He had respirations. He had pulse. He had blood pressure. But there was too much damage to the brain. Ladies and gentlemen, the investigation is complete. May it take it long. Maybe it could have looked prettier. But murder is not pretty. Investigations are not pretty. Investigations are real. It's akin to playing poker. You get 5 cards in your hand. That's all you got. You can't make up new cards. And you can't create evidence that doesn't exist. You have evidence. You have strong evidence. And I would suggest that evidence beyond any reasonable doubt that Rene Ramos, cold-bloodedly executed both Paul and Michael Donovan on the night of January 31st for the purpose and with the intent to steal that marijuana and then pay for it. It may not be something that I suggest the jury would think possible, but I also would suggest